So the other day I put out a video talking about the third-party games that I would love to see come over to the Switch 2. However, not every third-party game that I want to see come to the Switch 2 necessarily means that I'm going to be down to buy it for a second time if I already have it elsewhere. Now, there are some exceptions, obviously, like Cyberpunk 2077, which has cross-progression, so it'll be easy for me to pick that up and finally play the Phantom Liberty expansion. And when it comes to Bravely Default, I do already own a copy of this for the 3DS, but this is an HD remaster after all, so I'm expecting to see a pretty significant visual upgrade, and at a relatively budget price no less. But when it comes to a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, which I mentioned in that last video about the third-party games I'd love to see come to the Switch 2, I wouldn't necessarily feel personally super compelled to buy this game for the Switch 2. I mean, maybe for a comparison's sake against what it was like playing that game on the Steam Deck, but considering I already have so much time invested in my PC save for Red Dead Redemption 2, and I don't believe it has cross-save functionality, I wouldn't necessarily need to have it on the Switch 2. But the games that I'm going to go over today are titles that I would absolutely buy again for the Switch 2, if not for a third or fourth time, either because they have some unique appeal, or I just love the game that much that I would literally buy it anywhere. And the first game that came to mind, thankfully, isn't a theoretical game, and in fact we already know that this game is coming to the Switch 2 later on, and that would be Final Fantasy VII Remake. And some of this is just raw curiosity because I'm curious to see how it's going to perform on a technical level on the Switch 2, but beyond that, I did first play this game and beat it on the PlayStation 4, and I absolutely loved it there. However, I did not ever go back and go through the entire experience again on PS5, which would have provided a much better visual experience, and it's very likely that this version is going to land somewhere between the PS4 and the PS5 version. But if I'm being 100% honest, it's not really the raw performance bump that would draw me to experience this again, rather it's just the raw whimsical nature of Final Fantasy VII Remake and what a solid game it is in its own right. I wasn't even like a huge fan of the original Final Fantasy VII or anything like that, because Final Fantasy VIII was really the first experience that I jumped into full force. But the remake was just such a breathtaking experience between the characters, story, gorgeous visuals, and a predictably brilliant soundtrack. So much so that I would love to go through this experience again, and even if I didn't roll credits on again because it is a really lengthy game, it would still be a fun world to jump in and play around in, especially considering how well lamped portable systems are to RPG experiences anyways. Not to mention I do have physical copies of Final Fantasy 1 through 12 on the original Switch, with the notable exception of 10 and 10-2, which I foolishly traded in, so yeah, it would be nice to be able to throw a copy of this on the shelf as well, and to experience it in an entirely new way. And next up on the rebuy front is a game that I have a physical copy of for the Xbox, one of the few games I have a physical copy of for the Xbox, as I don't collect very heavily for that system, and then I bought another copy of it through Steam, and I would happily buy it a third time on the Nintendo Switch, and that would be Sunset Overdrive. And I had an absolute blast playing this on the Xbox One, and it ran extremely well on the Steam Deck. So I'd have to imagine it'd be even more solid on the Switch 2, what with its HDR support, and that could look really good. Although I don't think that game had native HDR support, I think that had like auto HDR that was added after the fact, whenever you played it like on a Series S or Series X, I could be wrong on that, but either way, it is a gorgeous looking game, HDR notwithstanding. And I'm positive an updated version of this would look absolutely amazing on the Switch 2's screen. And because it's such a vibrant, over-the-top action romp of a game, I just think it would be a stellar fit for that platform. And since I consider myself something of a seasonal gamer where there are certain games that I like to play during certain parts of the year, I can think of no better summertime action game than Sunset Overdrive to just take on the go with you in the middle of summer. Which is also kind of thematically appropriate when you think about it, because this game does place a lot of emphasis on traversal, and while some of Sunset Overdrive's humor and references are a little bit dated at this point, considering it did come out over 10 years ago, most of it I would say is charming rather than cringe. The only real sticking point where I would see this potentially being problematic coming over to the Switch 2 is I did not realize that the Sunset Overdrive property is actually jointly owned by Microsoft and Sony, weirdly enough. Microsoft, I believe, retains the publishing rights to this, and I think still has rights to do 2 more sequels to it, even though obviously nothing is manifested since the original. But as far as I know, Sony still owns the original IP itself. So it's definitely kind of an oddity, but given the fact that Microsoft is continuing to just expand the Xbox platform to systems way beyond its actual Xbox hardware, maybe they actually could work something out, and if so, I think that's a huge win for everybody. Nintendo would get an incredible action game to put on the Switch 2, Sony I'm sure would get some slice of that pie after they worked out the deal to get it ported over to it, and it would be a win for Microsoft as well, as they continue to drive home the point that they are willing to bring their experiences to other platforms beyond the Xbox hardware ecosystem. Not to mention, if they could successfully turn Sunset Overdrive into a multi-platform property, maybe that would bolster enough support that they could finally do a follow-up to it, which I think would be absolutely tremendous. But let's stop speculating and move on to this next title, which is a little bit sci-fi, and while it wasn't a PC exclusive, I only ever bought it exclusively on Steam, and that would be Chorus. And because I don't already have a copy of this on the PS4 or Xbox, this would be an easy purchase for me. In Chorus, you play as a pilot named Nara, who pilots a sentient starcraft known as Forsaken. And I really loved what I played of this game so far on the Steam Deck, and it does run pretty well there, although it never did get to a solid 60 FPS, although it did waver pretty solidly between 40 and 50 FPS. So with that in mind, like a lot of the other games that I've mentioned in these list videos leading up to this one, I think that would be a prime candidate for the Switch 2, because I'm sure it could get closer to 60 FPS steady considering its power profile, or at least match the performance we've already seen on the Steam Deck. Plus, with its mission-based structure, I think that just makes it inherently a pretty good candidate for a handheld anyways, and that's chiefly one of the reasons I love playing it on the deck. And what really drew me to this game over and over is not just the fact that it's a sci-fi shooting game, which is super fun of course, but rather it does expertly split that divide between approachability and depth. Sure, it's got nuance in how you build out your ship and just a solid sense of progression, but it's also just arcadey enough to keep it being fun without ever feeling overwhelming. And it's not that I don't appreciate a deeper experience with the complex mechanics or anything like that, but sometimes I just want to take in a spacefaring adventure without feeling like I need to check a walkthrough every 5 minutes, and Chorus is excellent at that. Well, that and of course a really interesting premise, but with a sentient ship and all, and better storytelling than I was expecting. So yeah, I would 100% buy another copy of this game for the Nintendo Switch 2, especially if they did a physical release for it, and even though I'd technically be starting over because I don't think it would support cross-progression or anything like that, I would be willing to do that considering I wasn't dozens of hours into the game, but I was far enough in that I knew I really liked what I played, and it's one that I like to hop into from time to time. Next up, getting only slightly more grounded than piloting a sentient starship, but still pretty over the top considering this is a GTA game, I would absolutely love it if Grand Theft Auto 4 came over to the Switch too. And I actually bought the collector's edition for the 360 back in the day, which is a really weird thing to say, although to be fair, I think 360 and PS3 are firmly in retro territory at this point. But then I did end up buying it again on Steam, and it ran tremendously well for me on the Steam Deck at mostly 60 FPS, if I'm remembering this correctly. I'm sure I hit the occasional bump here and there, but more often than not, I did not have any problem playing this game on the Steam Deck. Some people have reported having issues with it, but personally I always found it to be a really smoothly running title. And again, like every other game on this list, I'm sure it would achieve similar results on the Switch 2, if not run demonstrably better. And honestly, this might not be that much of a pipe dream because there are rumors right now that Rockstar is working on a remaster of Grand Theft Auto 4, similar to what they did with the Grand Theft Auto trilogy from a couple of years back. Although to be fair, that collection did not launch in very great shape. Thankfully, Rockstar would go on to patch it later on, but yeah, here's hoping if they truly are working on a remaster of Grand Theft Auto 4 that they're not going to try to rush it out the door and they'll take their time with it to make sure it's a polished experience out of the gate. And if they do, I would absolutely buy this again for the Switch 2, and I wouldn't mind axing about 10 to 15 hours of progress, I would say, to start over from the beginning. And the reason I don't mind is because I'm not really playing this game because I want to beeline the credits or anything, I just really want to take in the whole world of Grand Theft Auto 4. There was just always something about it that felt more grounded to me than the other entries that I'd played and beaten prior, and I think some of those things that really speak to me are I love the weather effects in this game, and I know the vehicle handling wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but I just really like the way they feel, and I tend to approach this game in a borderline role-playing kind of way, because I will absolutely just drive carefully, follow traffic laws, and try to like remain low-key when I'm not actively engaged in crime or anything like that. Kind of a weird way to approach it, I guess, since, you know, GTA is pretty much synonymous with chaos, but nonetheless, it's a game that I would love to experience again and start all the way over from the beginning if I had to, if I could try it out on the Switch 2 hardware. And finally, this last entry is one that is hyper-stylized and only available on PC right now to the best of my knowledge, and will benefit from the Switch 2 treatment in more than one way, and that would be Children of the Sun. Now, I first played this last year, I believe, and it's just an incredibly fun third-person supernatural sniping game. The basic premise is that you're on a mission to get revenge on a cult, but the twist is every time you take your shot, you only have one bullet to work with. Thankfully, you can control this bullet with your mind after you've let it fly, and incrementally layered mechanics let you continually reposition your shot mid-flight to take out multiple targets with a single shot. And it is just devilishly great fun that's made even better by a pulse-pounding soundtrack and super saturated visuals that are just completely on brand for Devolver Digital. And I want this on the Switch 2 not just because I think that super saturated color palette would look amazing on the Switch 2 screen, but also because I like the idea of using the Joy-Cons in mouse mode to get very, very precise with how I line up my shots. But seriously, if you've never played this game before, I can't recommend it enough, and even if it never makes its way to console, I would still recommend playing it on PC because it's a really great time. Also, like some of the other entries on this list, it also has a very specific mission-based structure, where there's a lot of incentive to go back and replay a scenario over and over so you can get the best scores, so yeah, I just think this is really, really well lent to the Switch 2, and especially good if you're going to be playing it in tabletop mode or docked mode where you have mouse capabilities. So yeah, seriously, if you haven't played this game already on PC, and even if it never makes its way to console, I would definitely recommend recommend checking this game out because I had a blast with it when I played it. But that's going to be it for this one. Those are my top picks for games that I would absolutely buy a second time on the Switch 2. But hey, what about you? Are there any games that are already in your library that you just love so much that you would buy a second copy just to see what it's like on that platform? Or maybe it's a game that, you just think would have some new functional ability on the Switch 2, like I just mentioned for Children of the Sun. If so, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. As for what's coming up on the channel, I will be highlighting some accessories that I picked up for the Switch 2 beyond like all of the launch stuff and all that. And then also finally getting back to some emulation content. As always, thank you so much for your time and hanging out here with me on the channel. I really, really appreciate it. Have an amazing day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.